It was 2:03 in the morning when I realized my life would never be the same. The kitchen tiles beneath me were slick with my own blood. My right shin bent sideways, at an angle no human bone should ever take. Every nerve in my body screamed, but what gutted me even more than the pain was the look in my mother's eyes. Cold, empty. She stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching as the man she married lifted his boot to strike me again. Keith, my stepdad, the man who had promised her stability, who called himself the head of the household. His face was twisted with rage as he shouted about loyalty, about how one signature could have fixed everything. And then, faint under his roar, I heard a tiny sound, a soft beep. Our smart speaker had come alive. I had no idea then how important that small noise would become, but it recorded every word that followed. I begged my mom, please, please stop him, help me. She did not move, did not flinch. Her silence was louder than Keith's fists. Before I tell you how I ended up crawling across a floor painted red, let me tell you who I was before this night. My name is Samantha Carter, but most people just call me Sam. I am 22 years old and a senior finance major at the University of Texas in Austin. Numbers have always been my language. Money made sense to me in a way people often didn't. That love for structure came from my dad. Dad believed education was armor. When I was 12, before his sudden heart attack, he set up a trust to cover my tuition and safeguard my future. Education is the one thing nobody can take from you, Sam. He used to tell me when we sat at the dining table over my math homework. At the time, I thought it was just something parents said. Now, I know he was preparing me for battles he would never live to see. When he died, it was just Mom and me. Her name is Allison Carter. For years, we were a team. She worked long hours at a local law firm, and I tried to make things easier, folding laundry, brewing her tea, sharing old movies on Friday nights. We leaned on each other, and even though grief lived in every corner of that little house, we had peace. I grew into a saver. I tucked away birthday money. I worked part-time jobs at 14 and opened my first checking account before I even had a driver's license. By the time I reached college, I was already the kid people came to for budgeting tips. I wanted Dad to be proud of the life he had given me the tools to build. But then, Keith showed up. At first, he seemed like a miracle. He met Mom at work, consulting on some case. He was tall, smooth, with just enough gray in his hair to look distinguished. He brought her flowers. He listened. He laughed at her jokes. For the first time in years, I saw light return to her eyes. And I wanted so badly for that light to stay. So when they married fast, too fast, I swallowed my unease. Mom deserved to be happy, didn't she? I was busy with classes and exams, and part of me thought maybe it was normal to feel protective. What harm could a man who made her smile possibly do? If only I had trusted my instincts. If only I had listened to that small, sharp voice in my gut, because the man who once held her hand in the office lobby would become the man standing over me with blood on his shoes, and the mother who used to braid my hair while we watched movies, she would choose him. And that night, as the smart speaker blinked silently on the counter, the world I thought I knew began to collapse. If you have ever seen control hiding behind love, listen closely. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes, the people we trust most are the ones who build the cage around us. My story did not begin with fists or blood. It began with absence. When my dad died, the world cracked open, and Mom and I did everything we could to keep from falling into the gap. She worked herself to exhaustion at a law firm. I studied hard, determined that his sacrifice would mean something. For years, it was just us against the world, and I thought nothing could break that bond. Dad's trust fund was more than money. It was his voice speaking through time, protecting me even after death. The rules were clear. The fund was for tuition and nothing else. The principal couldn't be touched until after I graduated. A trustee monitored every cent. At 14, when I started babysitting, I already knew how to track expenses. At 16, I was tutoring algebra to save for textbooks. At 18, I was working part-time in the financial aid office at UT Austin, watching other students' families struggle and realizing how lucky I was. But luck can draw predators. Mom met Keith when I was 19. She called me from work, her voice lighter than I had heard in years. "Sam, you won't believe it. He makes me laugh again." I wanted to be happy for her. After years of watching her loneliness, I thought maybe she deserved someone who brought her flowers and looked at her like she was the only person in the room. When I came home for Thanksgiving, Keith was already there. He carved the turkey, joked about his golf swing, even asked me about my econ midterm. "Finance major, huh?" he said, patting my shoulder like we were teammates. "Smart girl." It was fast. Too fast. By Christmas, his toothbrush sat next to hers. By spring, there was a wedding. I stood beside her in a pale blue dress, smiling for photos, ignoring the unease curling in my stomach. Keith talked big. Startups, deals, ventures. He said failure was just market timing, not his fault. At first, it sounded like confidence. Later, I realized it was delusion. The first signs were small. He checked Mom's phone when she left the room. He made jokes about her spending, then insisted she combine accounts like real partners. He convinced her to put his name on the house title, even though he hadn't paid a dime toward the mortgage she'd carried for 15 years. When I visited, the air in the house felt different. Tight, nervous, like we were all waiting for something to snap. Mom's voice lost its warmth. "Let me ask Keith first," she would say, even about the smallest things. Calls between us grew shorter. She canceled trips to see me, saying Keith needed her. She sounded rushed, tired, like she was running on fumes. The woman who once braided my hair while we watched black and white movies had become someone I barely recognized. I told myself it was just part of growing up, that maybe she was building a new life. But deep down, I felt the ground shifting. Then came the warning I couldn't ignore. Sitting in the library one night, my phone buzzed with a fraud alert, a credit inquiry, my name. I hadn't applied for anything. My stomach sank. When I called the bank, the rep said, "It looks like someone tried to pre-qualify you for a loan yesterday. Do you recognize this?" I didn't, but I had a sick feeling I knew who did. Keith had a way of turning failures into stories. He could lose $10,000 in a week and still sit at the dinner table, bragging about market shifts and timing. Mom soaked it in, eyes bright, like he was a genius on the verge of breaking through. To anyone else, it was smoke and mirrors. To her, it was hope. The first time I noticed how deep his control ran was during a weekend visit. I asked Mom if she wanted to go see a movie, just the two of us like old times. She glanced toward the den where Keith sat, scrolling on his phone. "Let me ask Keith," she murmured, like a teenager needing permission from a parent. It rattled me. This was my mother, the woman who once told me never to let anyone silence me. Now she could barely choose dinner without consulting him. Keith smiled at me over the rim of his whiskey glass. "You're so independent, Sam. Must be nice to have Daddy's money looking after you." I clenched my jaw. My father's trust wasn't a gift. It was his legacy, and Keith knew exactly how to make it sound like a weakness. Little by little, He tightened the screws. He criticized Mom's friends until she stopped seeing them. He commented on her outfits, then bought her new ones that suited his taste. The house, once filled with laughter and routine, turned into a stage where every line had to please him. When I tried to talk to Mom alone, she deflected. "Keith's under so much pressure, Sam. You don't understand what it takes to start a business." But I did understand. His business looked like calls that went nowhere, and lunches that ended with receipts longer than the grocery list we used to split in half. One evening, I noticed something strange. Across the street, a small red light blinked on a neighbor's porch. A camera, always angled toward our driveway. The neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, was a retired cop. I remembered her waving once when I was younger, though we never really spoke. That night, as I was leaving, she stepped outside. Short, silver hair, sharp eyes. She held a folded grocery bag, but didn't look like she was running errands. "You all right, honey?" she asked, voice low. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just busy with school." She studied me a second longer. Then she reached into the bag and pulled out a small card. "If you ever feel unsafe, call me. I keep records." Her eyes flicked toward the camera light. "Everything." Her words landed heavy. Why would she say that, unless she had seen something? Back inside, Keith stood by the window, watching. "What did old Delgado want?" he asked, his tone casual, but his jaw tight. "Just said hi." He didn't buy it. "Nosy woman," he muttered. "People like her don't mind their business." I tucked the card into my wallet, pulse quickening. For the first time, I wondered how many nights she had already seen him yelling through her camera lens. I drove back to campus, but unease followed me. Keith's charm, his control, my mom's silence. It all blurred into one sickening truth. He wasn't just after her. He was circling me too. That suspicion became certainty a week later when my phone buzzed with another alert. This time, it wasn't just a credit inquiry. It was a loan application, in my name. The first time Keith brought up money directly, it was wrapped in charm. He waited until Mom left the room, then leaned across the table like we were business partners. "You've got that education fund, don't you? 68,000, give or take. I could double that in 6 months. 30% return. Guaranteed." I didn't even blink. "It doesn't work like that. The trust can't be touched. It's locked for school expenses until I graduate." His smile stiffened. "Rules are flexible if you know the right people. Not this rule," I said flatly. "There's a trustee, a legal contract, and penalties if it's misused. I can't, even if I wanted to." He shrugged, but his eyes darkened. "Funny. Family helps family. You wouldn't even exist in college without your mom's sacrifice. Think about that." Mom returned just then, carrying coffee. He shifted back into charm instantly, kissing her cheek like nothing had happened. That was the beginning of weeks of pressure. Texts from Mom asking vague questions about how the trust worked. Calls from Keith hinting at time-sensitive opportunities. When I ignored them, he turned to guilt. "Do you want your mother homeless? Do you want the bank to take the house?" I could feel my father's voice in the back of my mind. Education is armor. That trust wasn't just money, it was protection. So I prepared. I froze my credit so no new accounts could be opened in my name. I printed statutes explaining the trust's restrictions and put them in a neat folder. I saved screenshots of every odd charge on Mom's accounts that I could see when she left her laptop open. And I kept Mrs. Delgado's card close, knowing her camera might end up being proof if things went too far. The next time I visited, the house looked worse. Paint chipping on the siding, a disconnect notice from the water company shoved under a pile of unopened mail. Mom wore the same faded blouse, from years ago. Meanwhile, Keith had a brand new golf set leaning in the hallway. That night, I stayed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, restless. Something told me to check my phone. A notification from the smart home app blinked. Motion logs, voice, command history. I scrolled. Entries were missing, whole chunks of data wiped. But the deletions weren't silent. They left traces. Timestamps with Keith's voice listed as the last user. Deleting, again and again, in the early hours of the morning. Why would he erase voice logs unless he had something to hide? The realization knifed through me. He wasn't just trying to control finances. He was controlling information, too. I closed the app, heart pounding. Every step he took was tightening the noose. The next morning over breakfast, he dropped the pretense. "We're having a family meeting this weekend. You're coming home. We'll settle this once and for all." His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was not a request. It was a demand. Mom sat, silent, hands clenched around her coffee mug. She didn't meet my eyes. In that moment, I understood. The meeting wasn't about family. It was an ultimatum. Sign the papers, or face whatever came next. When Keith said, "family meeting," I knew it wasn't about unity. It was about power. Still, I went. Part of me hoped I could reach Mom if I faced her in person. Another part of me needed to see the truth with my own eyes. Friday night, I pulled into the driveway of the house that used to feel like home. The garden Mom once tended with pride was overgrown, weeds climbing the porch steps. Inside, the smell of stale air mixed with store-bought lasagna. Keith had passed off as dinner. He greeted me with an exaggerated hug, too wide, too fake. "There she is, the financial genius of the family," he boomed, sloshing red wine into his glass. Mom stood behind him, thinner than ever. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. We ate in near silence. Keith tried to fill the air with talk of business opportunities and guaranteed returns. Mom picked at her food, glancing at him before answering even the simplest question. I tried to spark normal conversation. "How's Diane at the office? Did her daughter have the baby yet?" Before Mom could respond, Keith cut in. "Let's not bore Sam with gossip. We have important matters tonight." After dinner, I offered to help with dishes. "No need," Keith said firmly. "Alice, make coffee. It's time we got down to business with our daughter." Our daughter. The words made my skin crawl. He disappeared into the den, returning with a manila envelope. Inside, loan papers already filled out with my name, my social security number, my information. All that was missing was my signature. The amount, $68,500. Nearly everything left in my trust. He slid the papers toward me. "This is a sure thing. 30% return in 6 months. Sign, and everyone wins." I took a breath, pulled out the folder I had prepared. Calm, steady, like I was back in a classroom presentation. "The trust doesn't allow this. These papers are fraud. I've already frozen my credit. Any attempt to push this is identity theft, and I will report it." His face darkened. The smile fell away. "Ungrateful little brat," he spat. He stood, knocking his wine glass against the wall. Red liquid sprayed across family photos, dripping like blood. Mom gasped, but stayed rooted in her chair, hands shaking. I rose, reaching for my purse. "This conversation is over. I'm leaving." Keith moved faster than I expected, blocking the doorway. "You're not going anywhere until you sign." "There are no papers I can sign that will give you that money," I said, forcing my voice steady. The first shove slammed me against the dining table. Pain shot through my ribs. Mom whispered something. Maybe, "Stop." But Keith silenced her with a glare. I stumbled toward the kitchen door, heart hammering. "This won't change anything. Let me go." His rage erupted. The first punch cracked across my cheekbone, stars bursting in my vision. I fell back, tripping down the steps into the kitchen. My leg bent sideways, bone snapping with a sickening crunch. I screamed. The smart speaker on the counter blinked to life at the sound of my voice. Keith's boots echoed on the tile as he advanced. "You think you're better than me? Your daddy's money won't save you now." Through the haze of pain, I looked at Mom. "Please," I whispered. "Help me." She stood there, arms crossed, watching, and then she said the words that shattered everything. "You should have signed." The pain in my leg was like fire spreading through every vein. My head throbbed from where it hit the tile. I tried to scream, but blood filled my mouth, turning it into a choked gurgle. Keith's shadow loomed over me, his boot slamming into my ribs again and again. "You could have fixed everything with one signature," he bellowed. I dragged myself across the floor, nails scraping the cold tile, leaving streaks of red behind me. My body was breaking, but survival roared louder than the pain. The smart speaker blinked on the counter, silently recording every word. "Mom, please," I whispered. My fingers brushed against her ankle. She looked down at me with the same face that used to sing lullabies, but her eyes were glassy, unrecognizable. Her arms folded tight across her chest. "You're not my daughter anymore," she said. "Keith is my family now." Those words cut deeper than bone. Keith bent down, grabbing my leg, dragging me toward the basement door. "Nobody will find you down there. By the time they do, we'll be gone." Terror surged. Somewhere in the chaos, my phone had slipped from my pocket. It lay just feet away, cracked, but glowing faintly. Summoning every ounce of strength, I lunged, ignoring the explosion of pain in my leg. My fingers closed around it. "What do you think you're doing?" Keith roared. Lunging, I rolled onto my back and lashed out with my good leg, kicking his knee as hard as I could. He stumbled, swearing. The phone shook in my bloody grip as I dialed. 911, what's your emergency?" "He's killing me," I screamed. 23 Maple Street, please." Keith's boot smashed into my hand, sending the phone skittering across the floor. But the words were already out. The operator's calm voice still echoed in my head like a lifeline. "Police, Greg. What do we do?" Mom panicked. Keith's eyes darted wildly. "We take her downstairs. Now." He dragged me, my broken leg catching on the edge of the counter. Stars burst behind my eyes. Desperation took over. My hand brushed against the cast-iron skillet on the counter. I gripped the handle and swung with every shred of strength left. The skillet connected with his temple, a sickening thud. His weakened knee buckled, and he collapsed, dazed. For the first time, Mom moved. Not to help me, but to pack. She ran upstairs, pulling cash from drawers, stuffing documents into a bag. Keith groaned on the floor, clutching his head. "Get up," she hissed at him. "We need to leave before the cops get here." Neither of them looked at me. Neither even hesitated. Within minutes, their footsteps pounded out the door, tires screeching down the driveway. Silence settled, broken only by the ringing in my ears. I focused on one thing, staying conscious. Blackness tugged at me, but I forced my eyes open, counting the tiles on the ceiling. 1, 2, 3. Anything to keep from slipping away. Then, sirens. Distant at first, then growing louder, flooding the night with hope. Red and blue lights flashed across the kitchen walls. The front door splintered open. "Police! Anyone inside?" Footsteps thundered closer. A female officer knelt beside me, weapon holstered. "We've got a victim. Stay with me, sweetheart. You're safe now." As paramedics swarmed, one detail broke through the blur. Mrs. Delgado standing on her porch across the street, her camera light blinking. She had seen everything, and she had proof. When I woke in the hospital, my leg was caged in metal rods, my ribs wrapped so tight I could barely breathe. The nurse told me I'd been under for 18 hours after surgery. But what I remember most is the detective's voice when he came to take my statement. "Sam, we've got evidence. Strong evidence." I thought he meant my testimony. But then he explained. The smart speaker had recorded the entire assault. Every word. Keith's shouting, my screams, and Mom's voice, cold and flat. "You should have signed." The audio was time-stamped, stored in the cloud, and beyond Keith's reach. And that wasn't all. Mrs. Delgado handed over her doorbell cam footage. It showed Keith the night before carrying a box labeled cash from the trunk of his car into the house. It showed him dragging me toward the basement door after the fight. It even caught the moment he and Mom fled in their car minutes before the police arrived. Between the audio and video, the detective said, their defense is shot to pieces. I should have felt relief, but what I felt was hollow. Proof didn't erase the look on my mother's face when she chose him. 2 weeks later, they were caught at a motel outside San Antonio. When the news came, I felt my stomach twist. Relief tangled with grief, like two ropes pulling in opposite directions. At the bail hearing, I insisted on attending, hobbling in on crutches. Keith, in an orange jumpsuit, looked smaller, his swagger gone. Mom sat at a separate table, her hair messy, eyes fixed on the floor. Neither of them looked at me. The prosecutor laid it all out. The fraudulent loan applications, the identity theft attempts, the gambling debts, the assault. When the smart speaker audio played in the courtroom, you could hear a pin drop, my scream, Keith's threats, and Mom's chilling voice. "You're not my daughter anymore. Keith is my family now." Even the judge shifted uncomfortably. Keith's attorney tried to argue he had no prior violent history. But then the prosecutor dropped the bombshell. "Your Honor, we've obtained certified records from Oklahoma. Mr. Reynolds," Keith's real last name, was subject to a restraining order 5 years ago for domestic violence against a former partner. Gasps rippled through the room. Keith's jaw clenched, his mask shattered. Mom's lawyer painted her as a victim. She was under coercive control. She feared for her life. She wasn't capable of making independent decisions. I wanted to believe it. But the image of her standing with folded arms, watching me bleed, drowned that sympathy. In the end, the judge denied bail for both. The weight of evidence was too heavy. Months dragged on. I relearned how to walk, step by painful step, while the case wound its way through court. Keith eventually accepted a plea deal. 15 years for attempted murder, with fraud charges stacked alongside. Mom held out longer, her attorneys spinning tales of fear and manipulation. But the audio didn't lie. The jury didn't buy it. Faced with conviction, she accepted a plea. 5 years with mandatory counseling. The day I heard the verdict, I thought I would feel vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. Justice had been served, but no sentence could rewrite the truth of that night. Still, something shifted. For the first time in months, I believed survival could mean more than just breathing, because now their power was broken. The first morning, I woke without monitors beeping beside me. Sunlight fell across my face, like a promise. I was alive. My body was broken, but not beyond repair. Titanium held my leg together. My ribs were bound, my teeth wired, but breath still filled my lungs. And that was enough to start. Recovery was a slow war. Physical therapy tested me in ways no exam ever had. Every step felt like climbing a mountain with fire in my bones. My therapist, Maria, stood beside me, repeating, "Pain means progress, Sam. Don't quit now." Sometimes I cried in frustration, but each day I limped a little farther. Each day I reclaimed ground I thought I'd lost forever. While my body healed, my mind wrestled with ghosts. I saw Mom's face in dreams, sometimes braiding my hair like when I was a child, sometimes staring coldly as Keith's boot struck me. Reconciling those two versions of her felt impossible. My therapist reminded me I didn't need to reconcile them. "You don't have to make her whole in your mind," Dr. Levine said. "She betrayed you. That truth can stand without being softened." Zoe, my roommate, became my anchor. She moved into a small apartment with me once I left the hospital, cooking pasta when I was too sore to stand, staying awake when nightmares jolted me upright. One night, she said, "You don't owe anyone forgiveness to move on. You just owe yourself peace." I held on to that. The university let me finish coursework remotely. Professors extended deadlines, classmates sent notes, and the financial aid office gave me a virtual job so I could still earn while recovering. The trust Dad left paid my tuition to the last dollar. His voice echoed in my head every time I logged into class. Education is armor. By the time graduation came, I walked, limp and all, across the stage. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but upright, carrying scars like badges. In the audience, Zoe and Mrs. Delgado clapped the loudest. Mrs. Delgado squeezed my hand afterward and said, "You fought harder than most people ever will. Don't forget that." My first job after college wasn't on Wall Street or in some shiny skyscraper. It was with a nonprofit in Austin, teaching financial literacy to survivors of domestic abuse. The director told me, "Many people stay because they can't afford to leave. You can change that." And so I did. I stood in community centers explaining budgets, credit scores, emergency savings, watching women and men take back power stolen from them. The trust my father built kept me safe. Now I use its earnings to fund scholarships for survivors who want an education of their own. That symmetry feels like justice. Not revenge, but renewal. Holidays once meant cookie baking with Mom, or big dinners where Dad carved the turkey. Those rituals are gone. I grieved them, then built new ones. Zoe and I host a Friendsgiving for anyone who can't go home. On Christmas, I volunteer at shelters, serving meals with people who understand what it means to be both broken and strong. And then there's Cooper, the shepherd mix I adopted. Abandoned and scarred, he flinched at loud voices when I first brought him home. Now he curls at my feet, ears twitching at every sound. A guardian who knows what survival feels like. Together, we are proof that healing is messy, but possible. When Mom wrote me from prison asking for forgiveness, I left the letter unopened. Maybe one day I'll read it. Maybe one day I'll answer. But forgiveness isn't a key to unlock her place back in my life. It's a choice I'll make only if it brings me peace, not because she asks for it. I've learned that family isn't always blood. Sometimes family is the friend who holds your hand through nightmares, or the neighbor whose camera saves your life, or the dog who refuses to leave your side. Family is chosen, built, nurtured, in love, real love. Doesn't control, doesn't demand signatures or silence. It protects, it heals. If you're listening to my story, maybe you've faced betrayal too. Maybe you've been told you're not enough, or that you owe more than you can give. Hear me clearly. You are not what they say. You are not defined by their cruelty. You are the choices you make now, the people you welcome into your life, the peace you build for yourself. I don't carry hate for my mother anymore. Hatred is another chain, and I refuse to live bound. I carry the lesson instead, that we are stronger than the pain inflicted on us, stronger than the ones who tried to break us. So I walk forward, scarred, yes, but free. My limp reminds me not of weakness, but of survival. My future stretches out like that first morning light after the hospital. Fragile, radiant, mine. Life's too short to let bitterness rule. I choose compassion, even for myself, on the hardest days. I choose to release what was broken, and I choose to keep building a life full of love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Because sometimes the only way to honor the past is to let it go, so you can step into a brighter future, one built on strength, dignity, and the belief that we all deserve a beautiful life ahead.